Hello and welcome to the Trash Talk Podcast. I'm your host JJ, and today I have Sergey. I don't know if I said all the words,
Hello.
but you kind of understood what I was going for. Today, we
I
have
think you
two
did.
exciting topics for you and a halftime show, which means we're just doing the podcast as per usual. Sergey, what is our first topic?
First topic is the question why Earth actually has multiple nations. Why can't we just be one big happy family?
I mean, to answer your question, there's historical reasons. Uh, and,
That's too boring.
I mean, the literal question of why there actually is multiple nations is just because there historically used to be. National pride is a thing, and patriotism and all of that nonsense, and that kind of makes people resistant to changing that. Why has it historically been the case? Because, quite frankly, it would have been logistically unfeasible to have a worldwide nation.
Yay. Now that we've covered that, why can't we do it today?
I mean, okay, so there's two things here, really. Again, it's hard. It's gonna be hard to convince people, especially since not all nations necessarily operate in the same ideologies. Meaning that we're gonna deal with a lot of incompatible worldviews. Now, granted, you're gonna have different parties in democratic countries at least. You're gonna have different parties that have different beliefs already that can coexist and sometimes even come together to rule in like a coalition or something, if you have a setup that allows for that. And so it's definitely possible to have some amount of international organization. But even if the United Nations, for example, turned into something more akin to a world government, you would still have organizational groups, right? I can't think of a single country that is like ruled by one central government and has no like organization levels beneath that, right? You usually have at least like a lot of countries are federal nations, so that you have states, and you also often have county levels, and then in some countries you even have stuff between that.
Why can't we expand that hierarchy one step above to have like one instance that rules over the Earth and have all the countries basically as what's the word you used?
States?
States, yes.
I mean, it's not quite a federal country, but the United Nations to some degree does that, right? There are some international agreements that are like universally agreed upon, more or less. Definitely the UN doesn't have a huge amount of power. I definitely know that. So there's definitely, if you wanted to make the world more international, that would be probably where it could improve. You got other slightly smaller bodies like the European Union, for example. Of course, the European Union, from a size standpoint, isn't even that big. But that also allows them to just have a little bit more power than, say, the UN. Like, on an international level, it right now just seems like conflicting worldviews would make that very hard. I mean, countries that already get along could probably fuse without too much trouble. Countries that don't get along would have a harder time. And also you get into other issues as well, but I guess I'm going to let you speak first.
Yeah, but as you've also mentioned before, we also do have conflicting parties inside like single nations. So how would that be that different?
Okay, so interestingly enough, I have one point that I just thought of, but also I'm not sure how good that is, but minority groups might have a harder time being represented if you don't have individual nations, because you already have movements where certain minority groups want to split off from the country that they exist in to form their own nations to be more accurately represented. In a weird way, though, to more spread out groups, with whether they're minorities in like an ethnical sense or even just in like an ideological one. They would arguably have more representation though if they're more spread out, because what's a good example? Say you wanted a party that supports Jews. That's they're relatively spread out over the world. I mean, most of them, a lot of them are in Israel these days, but especially because they've never been accepted in a lot of places, they generally are pretty much spread out. So they, for example, would internationally probably get more out of having an international world government, because as a spread out group, they get more power, while more geographically based groups might have disadvantages from that. It's hard to come up with examples. I can think of stuff like,
as in we usually don't hear stuff that is far away from us.
I mean, yeah, I was gonna say like,
is it that concept?
Like Catalonia, right? So there is a region in Spain. I believe they also have a state system. I don't know, but there's a region in Spain called Catalonia, which was moving for independence for a while now, because they don't feel represented by the Spanish government, right? And if all of a sudden there was a world government, they would, comparatively speaking, make up an even smaller part of that. So they would probably feel even less represented. You've got, if we move a bit further east, you've got the Kurds, right, who live in like the border regions of multiple countries. What is it? Turkey, Iran, a couple other places, that already have troubles with representation. That I don't know if they would get better or worse. Like, I'm just spitballing ideas here, right? Stuff that comes to mind.
Yeah.
But, so you could definitely make arguments where there is groups that might benefit from it and groups that might have a detriment if there is a world government. It seems hard to make a government that represents all people. The more diverse it gets, the harder that would be.
Yeah, I do see that point. But like, let's go to a different angle on that. How about like technologically speaking, as in science? Wouldn't a world government help in terms of science?
Yes, though there is already some amount of international cooperation in science. I mean, scientists are probably some of the most international people out there, because scientists are more about knowledge oftentimes than they are about, allegiances. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't like government-sponsored science. There certainly is, but generally speaking, the idea of science is to come to, is to find truths about the world we live in. Science would definitely be helped, I think, by that, because there will likely, if there was a world government, be more easy international communication, and also there would not be anything kind of stopping us from going certain places to like look at something, right? So archaeology is one of those sciences that definitely is hindered a lot by national borders and by different regulations. But you also get those problems where certain a lot of these laws that hinder that from happening probably exist for a reason. So, for example, I know there was a thing where certain places, again, archaeology comes to mind, where they can't just dig, but oftentimes it has cultural reasons, right? Like, there's like a place that has a cultural heritage and they don't want people from outside to come in and dig it up. And, of course, different cultural identities are
that makes sense.
Kind of a problem already for this world government, because, as I said, every individual group would, in a way, be less represented. And you kind of have to make a new system that allows individual groups to kind of have someone fighting on their behalf, which political parties would be an entity that would allow it to do that to some degree. But right now, if someone has, if someone wants to fight for the interests of, let's say, is it something that is not very, I'm trying to make this not very political. Say someone was fighting for the interests of Canada, right? Then that is the Canadian government.
Okay.
I don't think I don't think Canada is particularly controversial right now. So
I don't know.
I mean,
Probably not.
I was trying to not go into countries that have like huge international conflicts going on right now. So I mean, if someone, say there was like, I don't know, there was some resource on the I mean, I guess borders wouldn't matter that much, but there's some interest that Canada's already pretty big as a country. I should probably I don't know. I don't know. Say the Netherlands have some interests, right? Like they want to defend their interests, then they have no one that defends their specific regional interests unless they have a regional party. But then if you live there, you might not want to vote for the regional party. You might want to vote for a more general interest aligned party, and then you get those things where, there should be a way to do that. And again, local governments would exist to some degree, probably, and those would also to some degree do that. But there needs to be a good system to adjudicate differences between different groups, different regions, I guess, different states, whatever they would end up being.
Yeah. How about like something similar to kind of how the German government, as far as I know, works, where the government gives out, makes laws that that are slightly customizable, basically, where the states can tweak them a bit, each to their own preferences and needs.
Yeah, the EU does that a lot too.
Wouldn't that be something? Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen with the EU that definitely can become a huge pain in the ass, because you got that thing. And in the US, the kind of similar things apply where you have different implementations all over the place. So basically, whenever you cross a state line, you have to make sure that you're not adhering to a slightly different version of the law. And I think that is something that came up with the Article 13 is what it was. They later changed the number, anyways. But
yeah,
the online filters, right? The upload filters. They're not supposed to be upload filters, but they also can't be anything else but upload filters. But anyways, the fact that every
actually
country
coming in a few days.
Oh right, great.
Yikes!
The fact that every single European country has to write their own legal implementation means that it's going to be a pain in the ass to adhere to for internet providers, like whether they be individual websites or actual ISPs. Everyone who's affected by that law basically has to deal with all those different national implementations or address the lowest common denominator, at which point it doesn't matter that there's different laws. The most strict version applies to basically to everyone anyways. Neither of which is necessarily great.
That only is a thing for the internet, isn't it?
Anything that is an international network of any sort. I'm just talking about computer networks, but like anything where it's like if drug laws, right? Great example. I think actually that is a thing in Germany as well, where you are allowed to possess a couple of grams of weed, right? You're not allowed to sell it, but a certain amount of ownership is not illegal, at least in Germany. And I think in North Rhine-Westphalia, I think it's 3 grams. I think I've heard that. I don't know if that's true, but not legal advice. But so I've heard that because you can go to the Netherlands where it's legal, you can buy it there and then just go home with an amount of weed under the legal limit. And I think it was 3 grams in North Rhine-Westphalia. But if you want to get... Wait, is North Rhine-Westphalia on the border? But anyways, the best way to get to the Netherlands, I don't know if there's another way, but would have you go through a part of Germany where you can only have 2 grams. Or something like that. The exact numbers might not be right. But, so, in other words, while you are allowed to possess as much as you want while you're in the Netherlands, and 3 grams while you're in North Rhine-Westphalia, if you're transporting it there, you can only take 2 grams because of the in-between law. And that's a bit of a small, unnecessary example, but it's kind of weird if you think about it, right? Like, if you want to transport something from A to B, you have to have intermediary laws that don't really make sense in context of A or B. And so, that is, this just... I don't know if any of what I just said is actually accurate, but I've heard that before because someone told me that once, and I thought it was silly. So whether the exact numbers or anything add up, I don't know. But those sort of ideas, and also, I guess individual like stuff like having to pay to have goods cross borders would not be a problem. But still, right? Like, whenever you have more regional laws, they are going to create some sort of conflict. The thing is, though, as I said, like that also includes you crossing a country border, anyways. So we gotta have differing laws whether we have a world government or not. So I guess in that way, the differing implementations wouldn't really be worse than just not having global rules at all.
I mean, still, the different implementations would be much closer together on average than they are now.
Yeah.
So maybe the example you gave with possessing a certain amount of something would be less, like, the difference would be less.
I mean, yeah, if you had to go through an area where it's completely legal, then that would be a lot more problematic, for example. So, if there is a thing where it's like, oh yeah, you have to make a law where it is at least allowed to carry a certain amount for personal use, then that would allow you to carry a certain amount for personal use, even if the amount differs from region to region.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I do agree that having more international approach to policy is certainly a good idea, whether it ends up being a world government or just more international cooperation. That doesn't really matter that much to me. I'm not particularly attached to any particular nation, so I mean, like, emotionally, I mean, I do have a German citizenship, which so in a way I am attached there, but one thing that I already like, for example, is the Schengen area, right? Where, as a European citizen, you can move to most places in Europe just without needing any sort of like visa or paperwork. Like, I could just get up.
That's pretty nice.
And move to, I don't know, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Spain, Italy. I feel like I'm just going. That clock should have started at Denmark.
Hey, why not?
Denmark. Wait, I'm going the wrong way as well, am I? Poland. Okay, now this is getting annoying. The point is, I could just move to a different EU country and start a new life there. I don't know about work. I don't know if I'm allowed to work there. I might have to get a separate work permit. But still, right? It's not like I can just go to Russia, right? I need some paperwork for that. They're gonna shoot me if I don't. Probably, I don't know. Maybe not actually. They'd probably just like throw me in a jail cell or something, and then like I'd have to get in contact with the embassy and something. I don't know. Point being, right? You don't go to Russia without your paperwork done. I mean, you do because you're a Russian citizen, but like me as a European, right?
Yeah.
But I can go to any of the countries that previously listed that are in the Schengen zone and in the European Union, and I just go there whenever I want, and that is really cool. And if we had an international government, then that arguably should be the place, the way everywhere, right? You don't need any paperwork to go places; you just go there, and that's cool.
Yep.
It's like I know we have a lot of American viewers, right? I mean, currently we don't have a lot of any viewers, but proportionally speaking,
generally,
you can just go to a different state. Like, that's kind of what I'm talking about here, right? Like, that's kind of what Europe is like. You know, it doesn't matter. Like, if you're in California, you can go all the way to New York. Wait, that's not the... I wanted to make an extreme example. If you're in Florida, you can go all the way to Washington. I mean, Alaska? That's further. You get my point, right?
Yeah.
I'm going into different corners on the map. It doesn't really matter for argument's sake. And when I was making the European example, I definitely went with adjacent countries to Germany, so I don't know why it's now all of a sudden... It doesn't matter. Also, it would probably be really useful for people that live in... I mean, I guess that wouldn't be the structure anymore, but people that live in exclaves of the country, right? Where, say, Königsberg, Kaliningrad, right? people
Oh yeah.
people that live there probably, I don't know this for a fact, but unless they're flying, I guess, but if they want to drive to Russia, they probably need a passport to drive from Russia to Russia. Right?
Yeah.
Let's not even get into the whole mess that is the India-Pakistan border, because Jesus Christ, that is a really bad situation. Because there's like hundreds of places from like individual towns that belong to one country but are otherwise surrounded by the other country. And because those countries don't have the nicest relations, they literally can't get out. And they also don't have running water in some of those places, because you would have to run a pipeline through another country. And those sort of things would be really nice if they could be avoided.
So basically, I'm hearing only minor negative points for the world government.
I mean, I guess you could argue
mostly positive.
I guess you could argue that there's no one to keep them in check, but I mean, you could say that about any superpower. It's like, I mean, yeah, sure, like you could say like, oh yeah, the US and Russia are keeping each other in check, but it's like, A, if they wanted to be allied with one another, they could. They don't have to keep each other in check. And B, the way they are keeping each other in check just means that if one of them starts killing people, we're all dead. I mean, like on a massive scale. I mean, they both kill probably hundreds, if not thousands, of people constantly. Like, but you know, on a. I mean,
yeah,
they're all involved in active wars. Not to mention that, at least in the US, there's also the fact that there's the death penalty. Though I think that's not executed a lot. I think that's, while you might get the death penalty, most people, I think, actually die in prison before they ever get executed. So, because execution just doesn't look very good.
Don't know about that, but sure.
I think that was the thing there. Also, people with death sentences get pardoned all the time. Like, I think whenever it's Thanksgiving, like, the president will, like, pardon someone with a death sentence. Well, not like a full pardon, but, like, so that they just get life in prison instead. Because...
yes.
Also, they pardon...
Much better.
They definitely pardon a turkey. So, you know, that definitely happens. Well, yeah, it's a... Okay, I don't think that's a legally binding thing, but, like, they basically just take a turkey from a slaughterhouse and then they just, like, set it free or something, I don't know. It's a PR stunt. Okay, the US is weird. I think
there
we're
are
not
weird
getting
traditions
any new
all over the place.
ideas here. Yeah, wanna move on to the facts of the week.
One thing though, a world government would be a lot better to implement global policies, as in keeping the Earth alive.
Yes. That's also something that I thought about before, where it's like, it's kind of weird if you have a bunch of countries working together to prevent climate change, but then there's other countries that have not agreed to those accords, and so we kind of have to, in a way, work against them, where it's like, if you aren't trying to be better, then us trying to be better might not be enough. And that's just kind of sad.
Yeah. Also, it would be probably a pretty good step to have a world government when we finally meet aliens in a couple million years.
I mean,
maybe,
hopefully. Yeah, there's a whole stereotype about the whole take me to your leader thing. It's like, yeah, so about that.
Which one?
Though, I would say that, though I guess with having regional governments, that might not be a big issue, but certain human rights things might be a bit more problematic, because you do, on some level, have to kind of cater to the lowest common denominator. So, certain things like, you know, there's still countries where it's illegal to be gay, right? Or trans, or either. And so, we can't really make it illegal on a global scale, I would hope. But even something like... So, while having laws that prevent them from existing might not be as passable on an international scale. Inversely, something like gay marriage, which is now a relatively normal thing in the Western world, would still not pass most places. So the question is, if we would have things like that, like laws that actively support LGBT people, for example. I mean, people of different colors as well, but like that's less of an issue these days, though that there's still definitely civil rights issues there as well. But
definitely.
So like if those sort of rights would maybe take longer to become available to people, or if we could then still implement those on a more regional scale, is an interesting question. Because as much as I like the idea of the entire world working together, first of all, that seems very utopic in thinking. It seems very unlikely to get people to do that. And second of all, I just wouldn't want that to come at a cost. On that chipper note...
How about we move on?
What about Facts of the Week? As I pull up our halftime show.
Apparently, in the 1700s, roughly, tomatoes were thought to be poisonous in Europe. And that was because when people ate them, they ate them on pewter plates, which contain lead. And the interaction of tomatoes with that led to
yes,
kind of withdrew the lead out of the plates, and people died of lead poisoning. So, yeah.
I mean, that's rough, but okay. I can see how you would come to that conclusion. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, heavy metal poisoning is not a fun thing, and we definitely have other places where it's problematic, like lead piping, and I think it's mercury in certain fishes. So yeah, I want to say it was tuna.
Also, I guess the fact that botanists recognizing tomatoes as nightshades, or as a nightshade, which currently are usually poisonous, did not help.
I mean, yeah, I could see how it's like, I mean, it's kind of a scientific approach almost, right? Where it's like, people eat this plant and then they get sick. So they probably should not be eating this plant. It's a logical conclusion to come to. And then you are like, oh, there's also plants related to this that are also poisonous. Like, yeah, no shit, this plant is poisonous. Honestly, I don't think finding out that tomatoes are technically edible was a good thing for humanity. I just don't really advance this. I don't think we need that. No, I just don't like tomatoes, okay? That's a personal thing.
Tomatoes are great. One of the best things.
No! Eat something nice, like cucumbers or bell peppers or something. I don't know. They're like better in every single way. Corn.
I don't know, man.
Like
bell peppers.
Yes.
I don't have anything against them, but I would prefer tomatoes over bell peppers.
What?
Honestly.
That's insane, Sergey. Don't be talking nonsense.
There's a person that that ate a whole onion like an apple.
Yes! I love onions! They're great! I would never do that with a tomato. I mean, okay, that would also probably be impractical because you get yourself all sorts of wet. But...
Not really, if you do it correctly.
If you, like, bite into a tomato?
Yeah, sure.
I think I'm gonna stick with onions. Or apples, though, now we're just getting to fruits. Though I guess tomato are fruits, so, Fact of the week, right. So what does it say? No, that's Song of the Week. That is Fact of the Week. Right. I did write that down. So, did you know that in the United States, on the mainland, there's 4 time zones? That part, not very exciting. Now, Have you heard of the state of Florida? I might have mentioned it literally earlier.
Yes.
Have you heard of the state of Oregon?
I've heard of it, but I don't know where it is.
Okay.
Let me look that up.
I was about to say, knowing where they are is kind of how this fact becomes interesting. So there's parts of eastern Oregon that are actually in mountain time, not in Pacific time. And the Florida Panhandle, or at least part of it, is in central time, not eastern time. Meaning, there's parts of Florida that are just, in terms of time zones, 1 hour removed from parts of Oregon. Which is kind of weird if you look at the map and you know where the time zones are roughly.
That is weird, yes.
They're in adjacent time zones. Like parts of the Florida Panhandle, well, most of the Florida Panhandle, and part of Oregon. Relatively small part of Oregon, but yes, 1 time zone apart.
Damn. That is interesting, yeah. Pretty cool.
Okay, that then brings us, as I take this away, to the halftime show.
Been a long time.
No, not. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm playing Would You Rather. I guess I should have said that. Would you rather not know how to read or not know how to write? Okay, to just say out loud what Sergey is currently thinking, how would you write without knowing to read?
Yes.
Right. I just read the description.
Know how to write.
I just read the description. Pretend that you're able to write without reading. Okay, I'm gonna say 2 terms right now. Text-to-speech and speech-to-text. And I would posit that text-to-speech is a bunch of crap and is very practical, and speech-to-text is kind of okay.
Yes. And you'd even be able to check if what you got is actually correct, what you meant.
So they're using the big brain there. Also, you can just get someone to write something down for you really quickly. I mean, I guess that is if you have someone in your life that is around you a lot. But, like, in most cases, you can probably get around through life without writing. Now, granted, there's people who can't read or write and get through life more or less fine. But I would think reading has more utility. I mean, I read more than I write.
Yes.
I mean, for fuck's sake. Like, I wrote this entire... let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I wrote this entire page of notes for 5 entire podcasts. I mean, to be fair, we do also have digital notes that have the topics on them. But...
Okay, JJ, how about I give another better argument for picking not knowing how to write?
Okay, I mean, to be fair, that was a better argument.
My entire job is writing code. How, like, time-wise, how much time percentually do I spend writing code?
Probably less time than you spend on Stack Overflow looking up how to fix your code. And that's not even an insult, that's probably just most programmers.
Actually, no, not really. You usually just read other people's code to see where to put your code.
Yeah, you read other people's code to maintain it, you have to read documentations for APIs that you're going to use. And I mean, you probably do more reading than writing, don't you?
A lot more reading than writing.
Granted, I don't think you could be a programmer if you're not able to write, no matter how much reading you do.
Also, what constitutes writing? Is it just physical pen on paper? Or
I mean, I was thinking typing
keyboards?
I was thinking typing as well.
Also count.
But again, I was thinking typing, yes, but I wasn't necessarily thinking like dictating something, like that is like literally just speaking at that point. And if the program just happens to be able to turn it into text, then I don't see why that should be considered writing. Which, by the way, both typing and handwriting might become less relevant in the future. I mean, handwriting is already relatively irrelevant.
Yeah.
I mean, I like it and it's useful, but you don't really need it. I mean, I would still go with read, though.
No, I can't imagine a world without typing.
Yeah, but again, like, speech recognition is getting better and better. And I think, like, the traditional keyboard is definitely something we're moving away from. We're already working on, I mean, again, like, voice interfaces are getting more common. There's already working on direct interfacing, like, neural interfaces. So...
Oh yeah, that I'm all for that shit, but saying stuff aloud that I want to write? Nah, man. Typing is just way easier. Like, even assuming that voice recognition was 100% correct.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I mean, you can probably also type faster than you can talk, realistically. Or at the very least...
I think so.
At the very least, you can learn to type faster than you can speak, I would think. Then again, you can also learn to speak really fast, but...
That maybe. Yeah.
I mean, also, I like reading.
Know how to write.
I recently got back into reading. Like, actually, like, reading novels, too.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I've not been reading anything in the meantime. But yeah, I mean, novels, man. Like, how am I supposed to learn a language without reading? That's just gonna take even longer.
Just listen.
I mean, that's mostly what I do, but still, like, some reading doesn't hurt. I mean, we're picking right?
Yeah.
We're just, like, I know I'm dragging this out so long.
Yeah.
Okay, you know what? Let's do one more! Because this took way too long. Would you rather stand on red-hot burning coals for 30 seconds without moving, or shut your hand in a waffle iron for 2 minutes? And I'm not allowing that clever guy from the top comment.
Yeah.
It has to be plugged in. Okay? Yes, you're very clever, sir. But, like, let's just take this for how it's intended.
I feel like one of the things is much more painful than the other.
Yes, I would agree. And the more painful thing also takes longer. Like, what the fuck?
Yes.
Like, I kind of get it, because I guess the one argument for picking hand would be that you have to walk on your feet all the time. And so every time you step on it, it hurts. Where with a hand, you can kind of not use it until it heals. But A, it's very hard to do that still. And B, I think your feet would be relatively fine.
Yes. Also, wheelchairs exist.
I mean, yeah, but that's also just highly impractical. But yes.
If need be. Yeah.
I would definitely also pick that one.
Also, I think hands have more temperatures sensors than
probably
feet have.
I mean, listen, so, I agree that heat is not comfortable. I once made the mistake. We're not doing any more questions. I'm gonna go back to this.
Oh, okay.
Did I just... I don't know. Dude, habits die hard, I'm telling you. I literally just used my keyboard to do this, despite having intentionally set up a mouse button to switch scenes. But anyways, I once walked on a roof after there was like 30 degrees of sun. That is 30 degrees Celsius. I don't know, but that's in Fahrenheit. I don't care. It's really hot, okay? Like, that's probably over 100 in Fahrenheit. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm just gonna say that. And that roof was probably hotter than that. And I walked on that barefoot. It was incredibly painful. Well, it was relatively painful. And, like, walking on most other surfaces hurt a while after that. But I was fine, like, within a couple of hours after that.
Yeah. It's -86 Fahrenheit.
Okay, close, right? I mean, I also don't know if it was exactly 30 outside. It might have been 35. It might have been like 28. I don't know. The point is, it was really hot outside.
It's in the ballpark.
It was in like peak summer, and I was walking around barefoot because it was peak summer. It was warm, right? I didn't need shoes, and you know that roof happened to be very hot because it was black. You know, that was not my best idea. That was not my brightest moment. Okay, I regretted that immediately. But anyway, so I did that, and I mean, burning coals is probably worse, but it can't be that much worse. And I definitely wasn't at roof for more than 30 seconds. I mean, I tried to not have my feet touch it for like extended periods of time. But I feel like I kind of have a frame of reference for that one. I have never burned my hand actually, which not like on a hand-wide scale at least. I mean, I might have burned my fingers a bit, but. You know, that's not necessarily something I want to add to my like list of experiences.
Yeah, no. Also, hands seem much more useful.
Oh yeah, by the way, after having walked on that roof, walking on gravel was very painful.
Oh god, yeah.
I made a lot of bad choices that day. So that was my rant about me hurting my feet. Okay, honestly, I don't really have much of an idea about this next topic, but you suggested it, so... Sergey, what about a world without instant communication? And I wrote in parentheses, in essence, computers.
Yeah. Well, I suggested a topic like... I think a few months ago, actually.
Yes. It's been a while.
It's been a long time. But yeah, I also didn't really have that big of an idea what we could talk about it, but let's imagine, because also it kind of relates to our first topic.
I mean, yeah, you're not going to put up a world government with, like, carrier pigeons. That's highly impractical.
Yes. So, basically, I think computers would still exist.
Yes.
But we wouldn't be able to instantly communicate.
I mean, I guess
what the question actually is.
That means more than just computers as well, right? We're talking about telephone lines. We're talking about telegraph. You know, like we're talking about just about everything. Like those freaking like Morse transmitters. I guess that is telegraph. Right?
Basically. That is telegraph. Yeah.
Like you wouldn't have any way to communicate with someone that is like faster than, I guess, sending someone a letter, right? That would, I guess, be the fastest mode of communication. I mean, in an otherwise modern world, we would not be reliant on actual like messengers, like carriers. So, I guess like letters would be the fastest, which is still relatively fast, right? If you need to have a letter somewhere within the day, you can make that happen. At least if you're like a politician or something. I mean, me as an individual person, if I want to send a letter to the other end of the world, it might take a couple days, and I might not have a lot of power over that. But a couple days is still relatively fast compared to actual ancient times and like medieval times and whatnot.
Sure, but how about like one of the implications that has no instant communication, meaning also no radio and all that fancy stuff, is we wouldn't have GPS and similar technologies.
I mean, I think we wouldn't have a lot of technology, right? Not just the one that literally relies on instant communication, but also, oh, right, you're saying planes would be more difficult. I mean, we had planes without GPS before. Like, I mean, it would be harder, for sure, but it would still technically be possible to fly a plane. You'd just fly it the old school way, right? With like a compass or something.
Yeah.
Like, height sensors are not dependent on GPS, as far as I'm aware. And
compass, sextant, and all that fancy stuff to locate your position.
Now, granted, the Bermuda Triangle would be a lot more dangerous.
No, it wouldn't. Statistically, the same amount of shipwrecks as any other.
There's magnetic anomalies! You could fly in the wrong direction if you're not paying attention and you don't know that. I mean, anomalies is a strong word,
Just
but,
do the same.
wasn't there a thing where, like, the compasses don't work the way you would expect them to? Like, at some points there? I don't know if there's a strong magnetic presence, or
I don't know.
that's just because of... Oh, yeah, no, I think that was because compasses point true north, and if planes got from, like, other places, would be more close to pointing at true north, where they'd have to correct a little bit because geographical north is not true north, is not magnetic north, which is not confusing at all. So I think there was a problem where at least one or two planes that were disappearing near the Bermuda Triangle were actually could be accounted for with them just not navigating properly because they weren't aware of how they had to use the compasses around there. There's nothing magical about the Bermuda Triangle, but it's still a very dangerous place, and I think GPS makes it less dangerous.
Also, I want to mention the fact, since I've also brought it up in one of the previous podcasts, can just freely use it, is that computers, like actually Turing-complete computers, were invented in the 19th century. And yes, they were mechanical.
Oh, yeah, no, you meant 19th. Yeah, right, before before Turing himself came along. I was about to say, like, that can't be right. Yeah, yes, right, you did mention that. I mean, yes, right, we said, like, computation itself would be possible. But, I mean, let's face it, right, when we think of computers today, we're not necessarily thinking of someone, like, not being connected to the internet. These days, it's kind of a default assumption that you have internet if you have a computer. It's not necessarily the case, but it's kind of the assumption. And quite frankly, I would be using my computer a lot less if it didn't have internet access. Right? Like, that's what I use it for almost exclusively.
I mean, it would be somewhat like consoles. Like, back in the day.
I was about to say, like, old consoles, yes. I mean, for fuck's sake, people buy a PlayStation to watch Netflix. I don't get it, but that's a thing that people do. Oh,
I do not understand.
To use it as a DVD player. Or, I guess, Blu-ray these days. But, because most people don't have a Blu-ray player, and they're not really included in computers anymore. Computers don't have disk drives these days, which is weird.
Mine does.
I mean, mine too, but, like, it's also, like, over 5 years old at this point.
Also, I do own a floppy drive, which is neat.
I mean, me too, but, like, I still have actually not gotten an adapter to actually put it into my actual computer, which I'm still planning to do one day.
But
yeah, no, I mean, instant communication, in a way, I could see how our current world could more or less work without it. I mean, there's definitely a lot of stuff that would need to be adapted, for sure. Right? Would not be an easy transition if we had to make it. But a lot of that would be possible.
Oh, you couldn't order food.
I mean, to be fair,
you'd have to actually drive there.
Yeah, which is not a big deal. I mean, if you have a car, that's not a big deal, I would argue. I mean, not everyone has one, so there's... but I think one thing that we have to consider is, if there had never been instant communication, then our world wouldn't look anything like it does today, because a lot of social movements, especially the more modern ones, have been organized over distances with instant communication, especially these days through the internet. I mean, to be fair, Nazis also organized through the internet. I mean, modern day ones, not the original ones. So there's definitely a lot of movements that we'd be happy not to have, but there's also other movements that, you know, we also wouldn't have, that we would want to have. That was a lot of things to say, right? So it comes...
Yeah.
There's both sides, right? But generally speaking, the idea is that fringe groups would not have a good way to organize without the internet. And fringe groups, again, I mentioned before, right? LGBT rights would be a huge issue, right? They would be nowhere near where they are without the internet. At the same time, Nazis are also all over the internet, and stuff like what comes to mind, the first thing is the January 6th Capitol attacks in the United States would have also not happened without the internet. So, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, right? And I feel like there's more good than bad that's come from that. Like organizing for social causes, I feel like it's more prevalent than organizing for negative causes, but that might just be the parts of the internet that I tend to frequent.
Man, I just realized TVs wouldn't be a thing either.
Yeah, no.
Well, at least TV channels.
That's the other thing, right?
The device itself would be.
I don't see why it would exist, right? Because what are you going to do with it? I guess you watch DVDs? I guess it's a thing.
Display information. Like, also, cinema. Watch cinema at home would maybe be a thing someday. Not initially when cinema was kind of starting out, but later on. Also for computers later on too. When computers would exist, they would need to display information somehow.
Yeah.
I don't think we'd stick to punch-out cards.
Maybe we should have. No, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement would have never happened without instant communication. Not only because a lot of it was organized online, but also because you would think that police brutality is a localized issue. Because you're not going to get a lot of national news coverage of that sort of stuff. Because national news is newspapers, right?
Yeah.
Without instant communication, that is the best news source. And that isn't gonna, a lot of news doesn't spread that far if you're only reliant on newspapers. People have said that before, those sort of issues, you never knew how broad they were, even back in the day when, radio and TV were a thing, just because news wasn't as democratized as it is now. I know there's a lot of false information on the internet, but also there's a lot of correct information that we would not have had access to without the internet. And that is just the internet, right? We wouldn't have TV news, we wouldn't have radio news, we would just have newspapers, basically. Or, I guess...
Yep.
We would probably still have something akin to TV, freaking Blockbuster or old school Netflix, right? Where it's I guess you would get CDs or I guess DVDs or Blu-rays or whatever that would contain news information that would come with a newspaper probably, because the idea of wanting to actually consume it in a audio-visual format would still exist. It would just not be as instant. So I guess they would just distribute it the only way they could. I guess thumb drives would work as well these days, right? You could just have it be MP4s. If that technology were ever developed.
Sure. Yeah. Probably would at some point.
It would just take a lot longer.
Yeah. Because the need for it would be much, much smaller.
I feel like the thing is that for a lot of things, the world would move a lot slower. And so progress would have been a lot slower as well, both scientific and social, because information doesn't spread as fast. I feel like the progress that our society makes is in part related to how fast our information spreads.
Yeah.
And I feel like in a lot of ways it would just be a couple decades further back.
Which would compile over time.
Yes, that's definitely a compounding thing. But
yep.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be that much different, which, that is a big thing, right? But I feel like you wouldn't really get... Because a lot of things would be slowed down by this. And I think that would end up being somewhat uniform. There's certain to be some things that are, out of sync to where they were supposed to be, especially because, I guess, hypothetically, instant communication could never develop, because otherwise, the logical consequence to a world without instant communication would be someone developing instant communication.
Yeah.
It's just kind of inevitable in that way, right? If we have every other technology that we have, it kind of seems asinine that unless there's some magic guru preventing us from doing it, that someone would not invent it. But yeah, I guess information just spreads slower. I don't see how that. Like, fundamentally, we're still the same people.
True. Yeah. I feel like we've exhausted this topic, didn't we?
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I have to add, which I think I kind of briefly went into, but is the idea that communities will probably be smaller, right? We probably not countries might be smaller than they are now because it's really hard to coordinate. I mean, it is possible to communicate through, as I said, in a written form with like letters or again like literally DVDs, but you would still need someone to carry it across. So the further spread out a territory is, the harder it would be to control it. I mean, I don't think the US, for example, would exist the way it does. Canada, Russia, China, right? Like, all of those like big nations would probably not exist in the state that they do. I mean, technically the real China isn't very big, but, you know, let's not get into that. I maintain that the Republic of China is the rightful China. That's probably not a very popular opinion with the Chinese Communist Party, but anyways. You might know them as Taiwan. But the point is...
Okay.
There was a war between the communists that overthrew the government. The government then fled to Taiwan, and technically there was never a peace treaty signed. So technically you could argue that the war is still going on. But it's just kind of cold right now. But it's a whole thing. I mean, honestly, that's another interesting thing to talk about. Like, what makes a government legitimate, right? Because at the end of the day, it has existed for a while and no one really challenged it on a scale where that's relevant. Because, in a way, every government at some point, like, probably violently took over from the previous government. Like, a lot of those transitions don't happen peacefully. And just because, like, someone signed, like, an armistice that made them then, like, declare them the loser of a war doesn't necessarily make it any more legitimate. I don't know. There's a lot of governments that just kind of came into being.
I guess it's just trust from the people.
Yeah, I don't trust the Chinese Communist Party. But anyways,
not you, but them's over there probably do. Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, it's definitely something that is shrinking, but the tendencies are not looking good for the regime over there. But that's a whole other issue. But again, like, countries like the US would not exist, I think. Now, people are going to point out the US was founded way back when. I mean, its current size is actually not that new, not that old. I mean, Hawaii only became a state relatively recently in the grand scheme of things. I think it might have been in the 60s. Now I would look that up. Because I don't want to say something wrong there. Hawaii, double I, became a state in, does it say that somewhere? Admitted to the Union, 1959. Okay, it wasn't the 60s, it was 59. I was close. But one of the first things that the Americans did was telegraph lines, right? Like there's been telegraph lines throughout the US for like pretty much most of its history as like a nation. And whenever a state became a state, like they had telegraph lines pretty much. I mean, there was still a lot of courier stuff going on, and it's not like they had instant communication across the entire thing. But also, it was originally a loose federation of states. And the federation was relatively loose in the beginning, and the more communication got faster, the tighter the federation became. Because you could more universally regulate things more easily. So I think like those sort of like huge supranations would not exist without instant communication. And like let's not even get started about the whole idea of a world government. So what is it you're looking up, Sergey?
Looking up when telegraphs were invented.
Oh, that's actually a good point. I mean, I just made most of this up, but I feel like, you know, if you think like even War of Independence, I feel like telegraph lines were probably a factor in that. It seems like a thing I associate with that time. I don't know if that's true. Like, maybe that's just me, my mind making things up. Telegraph. Blah, blah, blah. Telegraphs, long distance. Oh, flag semaphore. That's nice. Yeah, no, I meant like
Yeah,
modern
like
telegraph.
1750s.
Yeah, and I mean, the Declaration of Independence was 1776. And
Yeah.
we're talking about the 13 colonies here. We're just talking about New England, basically. Like, we're not talking about like California and like Seattle and Oregon.
1750s
Washington.
was like the first idea to use electronic telegraphs.
Yeah, but again, like, I'm not saying that New England
Yeah.
wouldn't have become a thing, but like, the 13 colonies is just the Northeast, right? Like, California, Washington, Oregon, whoa! Like, those are way over there. Like, let's see. When did... Let me look up something. Which one of those became a state first? That's actually California is the biggest one. California became a state in 1850. Washington... Yeah, state. Yes, thank you. Became a state in 1889. And Oregon... I misspelled Oregon, didn't I? How did I misspell Oregon? That should not happen. That is not 1859. So yeah, like 1850 was California was the first one. I thought it might have been the first one, but yeah, like 1850. That's almost 100 years later.
Yeah. That is roundabout when electric telegraphs became the standard for continental European telegraphy.
Yeah,
like 1851.
I mean, okay,
yeah.
But also, again, like the federal government didn't have a lot of power at the time, and they sure as hell didn't have the power to enforce it necessarily. Like the whole Wild West idea, right? Like that's over there. That's like Washington, Oregon. Like that sort of area, I think, and they were only wild because they weren't as tightly governed because it just was harder to govern a place like that. And to be fair, it wasn't as wild as people think, and there was local governments, but the federal government like didn't have a lot of power in the US back then. And I firmly believe that it only really became more powerful and actually in the way that we look at it today because of instant communication. I mean,
probably.
I mean, other countries, I pointed out China, right? Like, they've existed for a long time, and the Chinese territory used to be pretty big in the past as well. But they also had local rulers and all of that stuff, and they constantly broke apart and reformed, because there was constantly wars over that sort of stuff. And it's just very hard to run a country that big and actually maintain power over the fringes. That's also the thing where oftentimes local rulers would usually have a lot more power than a federal government back in the day. Because the central government
makes a lot of sense.
Wouldn't have the power over all of their territory. Like, it's just way too big. I mean, Roman Empire as well, right? Like they basically just had a bunch of vassal states that paid taxes to them. I mean, sure, that was like freedom of movement as if you were a Roman citizen and whatnot, but the federal government didn't exactly have like fine detailed control over like the fringe territories. I mean, maybe I'm just misrepresenting history here. Yep. It's not my specialty, but I just don't think that huge nations like that could like exist in the way that they do today, where a central government actually has a lot of power over the entire population. That just could not. I can't conceive of that without instant communication. Not necessarily the internet, but like again, telegraphs, telephone, radio, right? Like radio is just relatively short distance, but you know those sort of things. Like
no. It completely depends on what wavelength you use.
Okay, yes. I mean, like, what we think of as radio, right? Like, that's just a relatively small sliver of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, yes, technically there's a big spectrum of radio waves, but all of those sort of things, if we don't have none of that, and our fastest method is sending a guy with a letter, I mean, at least he doesn't have to run, he gets a car, I guess, but...
Yeah.
Actually,
or a plane.
Let's go to...
Or a ship. whatever is
Maps.
faster.
I guess I should do that, but okay, let's just out of curiosity though. Which corners do you want to go? Which corners do you want to go through? I was thinking US.
Or what exactly?
Are we gonna go LA to New York, or are we gonna go Miami to Seattle?
LA to New York, because I roughly know what distance that is.
I mean, it should be pretty much the same. Los Angeles,
I figured,
California,
from the
USA.
way you asked.
I don't know if it's exactly New York City. Can I just... Yes, NYC, New York, USA. Thank you. That, by car, is about 42 hours. It's probably faster by plane. Actually, as a matter of fact, I can look by plane. By plane, it's 5 hours. That's not a lot, right? But you're not going to send a plane every time you want a piece of information delivered, so it's probably still like a once-a-day thing if you're flying mail back and forth. I guess actually there might be more flights. But still, 5-hour flight.
How about...
Actually, Miami, Seattle might be a bit further.
One thing, though. How about one of the earliest telegraphs? An optical telegraph. Like the thing that Tom Scott once talked about with in regards to market prices, where they had towers in Italy with big poles with kind of sort of arms on them that could form what was it? I don't know, like a dozen different positions, and they could transmit information that way.
I mean, that's kind of similar to...
It's not instant, so that would, I think, satisfy...
Oh, was that the one with water?
No, where they really just had a bunch of towers in, sight distance...
Oh, yeah, so they would just be manually
of each other. Yes.
I guess, yeah. I mean, again, Flag 704 was listed on the Telegraph subreddit as well, right? Where you just have some flags, and you just hold them in different positions,
Yeah.
I think that's how that works.
Basically that, but bigger.
Yeah, I guess.
That probably would take, maybe an hour or two. Or more.
I mean...
Depends.
I find it highly suspect to think that it's faster than a plane. Or, significantly fast. I mean, that would have to be a very, very well-oiled system and involves a lot more people. Not to mention that, again, we're assuming modern planes here, right? 5 hours is not a huge amount, but if you're trying to coordinate a country, and then it's just one of the distances, and I mean, they're just big cities, right? That's not... And they both have big airports, too, right? You could pick worse situations within the US that probably take longer to actually get from one place to another. New York, LA is probably... I would posit a guess and say that within the US that might be one of the most common long-distance flights. I think they're literally the two biggest cities. I mean, there might be shorter distance flights, I don't know, there's probably people that fly I mean, I guess maybe LA and then one of the big Texan cities or something, because they're just closer, more people make that trip, but New York, LA seems like a very reasonable thing, actually. Maybe DC, New York is actually pretty big because it's close together and they're both very important. I mean, DC is very important politically, and then New York, I think, is where a lot of actual finance stuff happens. And then LA is where entertainment happens. But anyways, point is, the world would be very different without instant communication, but mostly it would just be slower. And no GPS.
I guess, yeah. True. Which would make things harder.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, I think mega corporations might not work as well in that environment, which is a good thing. It would be a lot harder to have a global monopoly fucking Amazon. I mean, Jesus. I mean, okay.
I think no. I personally think it would be much easier to have a global monopoly. Because it'd be checked or controlled way less.
Yeah, but again, like logistically, that would just be a lot more difficult.
What way? Like, if you're a mega corporation, you have the resources to transmit information relatively fast.
I mean, I guess. I mean, also, you would have to probably deal with more jurisdictions because, again, I don't think huge countries would exist quite as easily. Maybe I'm just wrong. I feel like this is also, to some degree, definitely a topic for historians because we kind of had that world. We kind of know what a world without instant communication looks like because we used to live in that world. Well, not us personally, but like humanity for most of its existence. Yeah. And we can kind of go to like right before we got the first mode of instant communication and then just kind of start thinking from there. And someone could create a lot more realistic of an image than we could. Because the problem is, right, as with most of the stuff we say on this podcast, we just kind of pull stuff out of our ass. I mean...
Well, that's true.
I mean, I didn't prepare anything for either of those topics, right? I'm just making stuff up as I go. I mean, I know these topics were going to be there for a couple days, so maybe some stuff, like, I was thinking about before a little bit, but I didn't do any research.
Me either. So, yeah.
And most of it I wasn't even thinking about that much either. It's just, like, I find it interesting that sometimes we'll have a conversation, and I make a point, and so Gary will be really surprised about the point I made, and then I'm like, what? I just, there's just something that popped up into my head. I don't know, man.
Yeah, it do be like that sometimes.
I realize what I said, I don't think makes that much sense to people unless you actually know the context. Like, to you, this makes sense because you were there when it happened. But I don't think I'm explaining this well. What I'm trying to say is, so okay, do you have anything to add before we go to Songs of the Week?
Not really, no.
So okay, what is your Song of the Week? I should not say that like that, that sounds weird.
My Song of the Week is... wait, let me...
Why did I get the feeling that you hadn't picked up a song
before? What? No, I did. So, as you might know, Sabaton recently released a new song.
I did not know
Defense
that.
of Moscow. No?
No.
Man.
I'll check it out.
Give it a listen. But this is not my Song of the Week. Because I am picking the original song. Because Sabaton actually made a cover of a song. And the original song is Bitva za Moskvu by Radio Topok. And obviously it is in Russian, as you might have guessed.
I would have never guessed.
Yes. So yeah, go take a listen. Tell me what you think.
That brings us to my Song of the Week, and you might also have a guess about the language here. My Song of the Week is Que Vendrá by Zas. Sass? I still don't know how to pronounce her name. Point being, what language do you think that is? It's Que Vendrá. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that R correctly, by the way. That's... Not sure if that's supposed to be
like
cap or
I
curl.
suspect it's French, but it kind of sounds more Spanish. To
It's
be
Spanish.
honest.
It is in fact Spanish.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I believe I just put into Google Translate because me no speak Spanish. And it apparently means what is to come, which I kind of guessed that it had something to do with coming, and que meaning what, and vendrá having something to do with coming because well, there's venir. Again, but again, the literal translation again, like the fact that it's like a future tense and third person singular, I did not know that. So, anyways, that means what is to come, and the song is in fact partially in French, partially in Spanish, but the title is in Spanish. So, so technically, that was the language you would have had to go for, and yes, it did sound Spanish more than French because.
Yeah.
That was really all I
can tell languages apart.
Actually, it's also like an interesting skill in its own right. Being able to tell, like, if you hear someone speak, just knowing what language it is, or having at least vaguely knowing what language it is, even if you don't speak the language. Right? I mean, distinguishing closely related ones might not always be that easy because you can't know every language because there's like 7,000 languages in the world. But even knowing like what language family something is, right? I might not be able to tell you if it's like Dutch or Flemish or Afrikaans, but like I can tell you it's like a West Germanic language that's not German or English. Probably if I hear it, and I can probably also recognize if there's a North Germanic language being spoken. Again, I can't tell you if it's Swedish or Norwegian, but it's a North Germanic language, the Danish, Icelandic. Anyways, that has nothing to do with anything, and you should like the video. Because, let's face it, if you watch it until this point, you probably liked it. If not, what's wrong with you? Like, you're not liking it and you're still watching it for over an hour? Like, that's weird, right?
Then just give a dislike. It's still interaction, isn't it?
Yeah, but, like, seriously, like, if you haven't turned off yet, and you didn't like it, then, consult your psychologist or something. Like, seriously, like, that strikes me as weird. I mean, maybe that's just how you are, but, like, to me, that seems like a thing I wouldn't do.
Hey, wait. I can't think of a reason why that would be. Like, they're probably asleep and have autoplay turned on.
I mean, yeah, fair enough. I mean, you do you. Point is, like the video. And no, I was about to say, like, how can I subliminally tell people that are currently asleep to like this particular video? But no. Leave a comment about thoughts on all of the history and technology we just butchered in this episode, because we certainly did. Politics as well, corrections in the comments, please. I'm sure I got a bunch of things wrong. Subscribe to the channel, join the Discord server. Sergey?
That's it?
That's it.